The package slipped from Jack's hands and hit the ground harder than he expected, the sound echoing in the narrow concrete alley as the man in front of him shook his head impatiently, arms crossed, expression annoyed like this was all a waste of his time. "I didn't order anything," the man said bluntly. Jack blinked. "What?" "I said I didn't order this," the man repeated, already turning away. "You've got the wrong address." "No, wait." Jack quickly stepped forward, pulling out the crumpled delivery note from his pocket, his fingers slightly shaking. "This is the address. Name matches. Phone number." "I don't care." The man cut him off, opening his door. "Take it somewhere else." And just like that, the door slammed shut. Silence. Jack stood there frozen, the package still at his feet. His heart slowly sinking as the reality began to settle in. This wasn't a mistake. He quickly pulled out his phone, dialed the number. Once, twice, 3 times. "The number you are calling is unavailable." Jack lowered the phone slowly. His chest tightened. "No," he tried again. And again. Same result. His grip tightened around the phone as something cold ran through his veins, the kind of realization that doesn't come suddenly, but hits you piece by piece, breaking something inside each time. He had been set up. The alley felt smaller now. The noise of the city louder, colder, more distant. Jack leaned against the wall, sliding down slightly until he was crouched, one hand covering his face, the other still holding the phone uselessly. That money. It wasn't just money. It was a full day of work. A full day of carrying heavy loads, of walking miles, of sweating under the sun. Gone. Just like that. "I can't even do this right," he whispered, his voice breaking. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't think, didn't try, because it reminded him too much of the city he left behind. The traps, the schemes, the feeling of being used. And for a second, he wanted to give up again. A drop fell, then another. Jack didn't even realize he was crying until he wiped his face with the back of his hand, his breathing uneven, his chest heavy with frustration, anger, and something deeper, helplessness. "I promised," he muttered. Promised he would do better. Promised he would help. Promised he wouldn't be a burden. And yet, the phone in his hand tightened. His eyes slowly lifted. Tử Tiên. That thought alone stopped everything. Because no matter how heavy things got, there was still someone waiting for him. Someone who believed in him. Someone who didn't care how much money he had. Only that he didn't give up. Jack took a deep breath. Then another. Slowly he stood up, picked up the package again, adjusted his shoulder, and turned. Not back into the alley, but toward home. The path back to the village felt longer than usual. The sun was lower now, the air quieter. But Jack's steps were steadier than before. Not because things got easier, but because he chose not to stay down. When he reached the market, Tử Tiên was still there, arranging fruit carefully on the stall, her movements calm, familiar, grounded in a way that always made everything feel a little less chaotic. She looked up the moment she saw him, and immediately something felt wrong. Jack. He didn't answer right away. He walked closer, set the package down, then finally looked at her. And she saw it. The exhaustion, the frustration, the hurt he didn't even try to hide. "What happened?" she asked softly. Jack let out a breath. "A delivery," he said slowly. "I had to pay first." Her expression changed. Then, he gave a small bitter smile. "They said they didn't order anything." Silence. "Phone number?" she asked immediately. Jack handed her the phone. She looked at the screen, at the number, and in that exact second, her eyes sharpened. "This number," Jack watched her. "You know it." She didn't answer immediately, but her jaw tightened slightly. "I've seen it before," she said. Jack frowned. "Where?" Tử Tiên looked up at him, and this time, her expression was no longer soft. It was cold, controlled, focused. A Páo. The name landed hard. Jack's fingers curled slightly. "That makes sense," he muttered. But Tử Tiên didn't look surprised. She looked certain. "He's done things like this before," she said quietly. "Not this big, but enough." Jack exhaled slowly. "So I just lost a day's pay." "No," she said. Her voice was firm. different. You didn't lose anything. Jack looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Tử Tiên handed the phone back, her eyes steady. We're going to get it back. Jack blinked. How? She took a step forward. Her expression didn't change. I'll call him. The call connected faster than Jack expected. For a brief second, neither of them spoke, the faint sound of wind passing through the phone filling the silence, until finally, a voice answered. What? A Páo. Casual. Unbothered. Like nothing had happened.
Tử Tiên din tờ hestita.
A Páo, she said, her tone calm but sharp enough to cut through any pretense. We need to talk. A short pause, then a quiet chuckle. About what? You know exactly what, she replied. Another pause, longer this time. Then, where? The meeting spot was the edge of the village, near the old wooden bridge that connected the market road to the forest path, a place quiet enough for conversations people didn't want others to hear, but open enough that no one could pretend things didn't happen. Jack stood beside Tử Tiên, his arms slightly tense at his sides, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, while the fading sunlight cast long shadows across the ground, making everything feel heavier, slower, more serious. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Tử Tiên didn't look at him. Yes, I do. Her voice didn't shake, didn't hesitate, and that alone told him there was no stopping her. The sound of a motorbike broke the silence. A Páo arrived, slow, confident, like he was walking into something he already controlled. He stopped a few steps away, cutting the engine, leaning slightly against the bike as he looked at them, his expression unreadable but far from worried. You called me out here, he said. So talk. Jack took a step forward instinctively, but Tử Tiên raised her hand slightly, stopping him. She stepped ahead instead, facing A Páo directly. You set him up. No greeting. No build-up. Just truth. A Páo smirked. Careful with your words. You used a fake order, she continued, her eyes locked on his. Made him pay. Then disappeared. Silence. Páo didn't deny it. Didn't confirm it either. He just watched her. Waiting. Testing. So what if I did? He said finally. Jack's fists clenched instantly. But Tử Tiên didn't move. If you don't return the money, she said slowly, and apologize. A Páo laughed. Loud. Sharp. You're serious? Her expression didn't change. Very. The laughter faded, and for the first time there was a crack. A small one. In his confidence. You think you can threaten me? He asked, his tone dropping slightly.
I'm not threatening you, Tử Tiên replied.
I'm giving you a choice. Jack glanced at her. Even he hadn't expected that. You can fix this now, she continued. Or I take it to the police. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Real. Because this time it wasn't just about pride. It was about consequences. A Páu's jaw tightened slightly. His eyes shifted briefly toward Jack, then back to Tử Tiên. You'd go that far? He asked. Yes. No hesitation. No fear. And that answer changed something. The wind picked up slightly. The bridge creaked softly. The tension stretched. Long uncomfortable. Until finally, A Páo let out a quiet breath. Annoyed. Frustrated. But no longer amused. You've changed, he muttered.
Tử Tiên din tờ red pawn.
She didn't need to. Slowly, A Páo reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded stack of cash, held it for a second, then threw it toward Jack. The money hit the ground between them. Not respectful, not sincere, but returned. Jack didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed on A Páo. You're missing something, he said. A Páo looked at him. What? Jack's voice was calm, but firm. The apology. Silence. A Páu's expression hardened instantly. You're pushing it. Jack didn't step back. You pushed first. The tension spiked again. Sharp. Dangerous. For a moment it felt like everything might break. Then, TCH. A Páo looked away. Clicked his tongue. Fine. He glanced back. Not at Jack.
A Tử Tiên. Sorry.
The word came out flat. Empty. But it was said. And that was enough.
Tử Tiên stepped back slightly.
Her shoulders relaxed just a little. Not fully, but enough. "It ends here," she said. Páo didn't answer. He got back on his motorbike, started the engine. But before leaving, he looked at Jack one last time. "This isn't over." The same words, but different now. Less control, more frustration. Then he drove off, disappearing down the path. Silence returned. Jack bent down slowly, picked up the money, held it in his hand. For a moment, he just stared at it, then exhaled. "We got it back."
Tử Tiên note that.
Yes, but her eyes weren't on the money. They were on him. "You okay?" she asked. Jack looked up. A small pause. Then, "Yeah." And this time it was true. They stood there for a while longer, not speaking, just letting everything settle. The anger, the tension, the relief. Because sometimes, winning doesn't feel loud. Feels quiet, steady, real. As they walked back toward the village together side by side, the sky slowly darkening above them, Jack tightened his grip slightly around the money in his hand. Not because he was afraid of losing it again, but because now, he understood its weight. And beside him Tử Tiên walked calmly, her presence steady, her steps unwavering, like someone who didn't just protect what she loved, but fought for it. Behind them, somewhere in the distance, the sound of a motorbike faded, but the feeling it left behind didn't, because some conflicts don't end with one meeting. They wait, they grow, and when they return they test everything again. But this time, Jack wouldn't fall so easily, and Tử Tiên wouldn't let him.